Okay, and I think we can get started. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be posted online. And with that, let's start with administrative stuff. First order of business, can anyone scribe?
We can give it a try unless anybody else is itching to do it.
That would be highly appreciated. Thank you.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, for the next call, it's scheduled for February 27th, same time as now, unless someone has any major objections or conflicts. Okay. And finally, on the administrative side, I sent an email today where we're basically in search of another co-chair to to help manage the group. So if anyone here is interested, other than Nick that already replied gracefully, please let us know either publicly or privately, and yeah, we'll we'll take it from there. Okay, and now for actual discussion. We have a few proposals here we want to discuss today, and then a bunch of issues. Most of them are related to resource timing and the resource timing, performance APIs in general, and privacy and security related concerns. But let's start off by talking a bit again about is input pending. Andrew?
All right, sounds good. Okay, cool. So this is going to be pretty brief. I just thought I'd clarify a few things from some prior calls and bring up some topics for discussion that I thought maybe should be fleshed out a little bit more. We might have talked about briefly at TPAC, particularly regarding the need to yield without is-input pending. So let's dive into it. So yeah, last time we talked about the issue of like correct frame attribution off the main thread with iframes, and particularly the tricky case of iframe motion, where you might, I've talked about this a million times by now, but you click like in a region where an iframe is not, say the iframe moves into view, the user agent has to take very careful procedure to ensure that the parent can't detect is-input pending when the DOM event gets dispatched to the iframe, when it's cross origin, of course. And so we chatted a little bit about that, how a locking-based solution that fixes DOM events to the origin that could be detected as the owner of that event off main thread would be potentially a good solution, and we're gonna move that over to tag review as well. We also chat a little bit about moving to the whole like bipartite continuous discrete like is-input pending option struct, how we believe that like handles the large majority of events that users want to listen for. So diving straight back into it, I want to make it clear that the current Chromium implementation does not suffer from the DOM event sniffing problem at all. I didn't make this terribly clear, and it's primarily because I was trying to focus on the issue that main thread event attribution would be insufficient for delegating this completely. So with the existing UPIF infrastructure, we effectively ensure that once a frame or once an input event is dispatched to a given renderer process, it cannot jump around. So the frame that can detect is-input pending true will be the only frame that receives the DOM event. That being said, I was a little bit worried about whether or not the intent to dispatch an event, which is where, say, a renderer receives the is-input pending bit off main thread that an event is intended for an origin, and then later frame motion causes the event not to be dispatched, could leak the sort of intent from the user that they wanted to click inside of an iframe that's cross origin, even though it was not resulting in a DOM event dispatch. So does anyone want to chat a little bit about that? Whether they know of any prior context, whether or not that like proto intent is at all a concern, or should we just discuss this in the tag review?
What do you mean by proto intent?
So basically, an idea that you can sort of sniff for when an intent or when an event was going to be dispatched to a frame, but doesn't actually get delivered due to frame motion. So like, suppose the main thread is blocked and you click on a region, and then that gets attributed to a given process, and then that process decides, oh, it's like, this wasn't actually intended for me. There was like an iframe here by the time the event was actually like queued for dispatch on the main thread. And so in that case, if that origin was like polling ism pending and they noticed that they didn't get the event dispatched, they could infer that an input was intended for an iframe.
Wait, but that contradicts with the prior statement that like current Chromium implementation doesn't allow sniffing. It sounds like it allows sniffing.
Well, they don't get to actually sniff DOM events that are dispatched. The DOM events are not successfully dispatched. So the input is basically thrown away.
I don't think whether event gets dispatched or not like makes a difference, right? If you can detect the presence of event that may or may not eventually be dispatched. Because the thing is, page may navigate between the time you have detected that there was a pending event and event actually gets dispatched. So I don't think that's relevant at all.
Well, how would the event get, like, this is in the context of the locking solution that we discussed before, where based on the current like visual representation, we obtain the origin where the event was intended for. And then when it comes time to like queue the task to dispatch that on the main thread, we can like very obviously throw it away when we notice that this wasn't where we intended the event to go.
Hold on. Why would that make it event dispatch not happen?
Well, the idea here. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't follow the description. Why is that the event suddenly not being dispatched?
Well, no, this is in a world assuming that we perform the origin attribution off main thread. So we know what origin based on like the last presented state should be associated with an event. And what I'm suggesting right now is that there is the only sort of leak you could call it is when you click on a region or say like have an event in a region and that is attributed to like an origin. And then say the like origin of that position or there's a frame with a different origin in that position that causes the event not to be dispatched at time of event dispatch, it is still detectable by isInput pending when it comes time, like say the parent is executing code prior to that.
So what I don't understand is why is that after we have decided that this event should belong to this origin, later do we decide not that that's not the case? Like I don't understand at all. Like how is that even possible?
Well, we're assuming that the frame has movement between the time isInput pending is called and the time that DOM event dispatch occurs.
But like why does a movement affect the event we have already decided to dispatch to one frame?
I mean, if you're doing event dispatch and there is an iframe at the given position in the view of, say, the parent, you will not dispatch an event to the parent with a mouse event at that location.
I don't follow what you're saying.
I think so. You have the currently presented stuff on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
We can do a fast hit test to determine which origin would receive the hit test event if nothing changed. But then when we actually do the dispatch on when the event comes up on the event loop to actually do the dispatch, we do a hit test and the DOM may have been mutated in the meantime.
Right.
And that could result in the event being dispatched against a different origin because.
But the event was being dispatched to the frame, right? So at that point, why is that event directly going to the frame? Why is it like, why are we doing the secondary hit testing in the main thread that determines to be a different location? That's like, that makes no sense to me.
Because the hit test is on an element, and the element that was hit needs to be determined by the hit test algorithm. So there's a first hit test that can be done at like a frame basis that's efficient, and then later when the actual event is sent to script, it would need to determine the exact element in the DOM that was
right. Like, but exact element, how is that exact element changing location when the frame is like, if the entire frame is moving?
Yeah.
And if we have already previously determined what a frame is and knew the relative portion to the frame, why is the hit testing?
Well, we could just dispatch we could just dispatch the element at an offset into that frame which it had when we did the original approximate hit test. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. Why are we not doing that?
That strictly seems like it would leak more information than not dispatching the event in the first place, to me at least.
Wait, why?
Well, you're receiving an event that that shows user intent to provide input to a cross-origin iframe, whereas omitting the event entirely seems.
Here's what I don't understand.
Okay.
In your description,
Mhm.
like, let's make this example very simple, right? You have a main frame, and let's say you have a child frame A, right?
Right.
And you're saying that initially, so in a child frame A is a cross origin. You hit test, like a user clicks on screen, right?
Mhm.
User clicks on the screen, and we determine that the click is upon the frame A,
Mhm.
right? And then we decided that that's a cross origin, so we say that is pending input on the main frame is false, and is pending input on a frame A is true, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll dispatch event in the frame. You're saying that between the time we'll send that event to the mainframe, something happens because it like a cross-processor create thread. So now the frame is slightly down, right? So now suppose the original coordinate user click is no longer inside A and in the mainframe, right? But that's completely irrelevant. Like, we can determine at the time we have determined the event goes to A, the relative portion to the A, and send that relative portion to A. How does that leak any information?
So what I'm suggesting right now is, like, suppose that you have so in your example, like A can observe the event via is input pending, right?
Observe that it's queued, yes.
Yes, observe that it's queued. And so, like, during the time between the event detection and the event dispatch, suppose the parent frame moves that. And then, so what that means is that it is possible that in the case where, say you translate the frame down, and the frame no longer will receive the event. Okay.
Like, see, here's a problem. That statement, the flame no longer receive event, makes no sense to me. Like, why is that happening?
Suppose there's a task queued just to move the frame down, or there could be a scroll. Effectively, what that means is that even though, like, the input was intended for the iframe, it will be dispatched to the main frame.
But why? Why are you dispatching the mainframe? That's like, where does that logic come from? What is causing that to happen?
It's just the way, like,
I think
the main thread hit test. Sorry, go ahead.
I think the semantics Ryosuke is suggesting could be implemented pretty easily.
Yeah.
When is input pending causes the event to be observed in the queue, then we make sure to dispatch it in the manner Ryosuke is suggesting. I think that would be fine. In fact, because of the presence of asynchrony between multi-process UPIF type scenarios, you can already have this kind of thing happen anyway. Just because frames are not always in sync, kind of on purpose, because it's a multi-process, preemptive multitask system. So there are cases where, Andrew, where at the moment, Chrome's, for example, implementation would need to be adjusted to do what Ryosuke is suggesting, but I think it would work, and I don't think there would be a security issue raised by it.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it some more, but yeah, that sounds good. Okay. I don't think there's anything like fundamental that prevents us from doing that in the API. Like the only real constraint that the API imposes is that a frame may not detect an event that ends up getting dispatched to a different origin, which I wanted to make sure was like very clear was respected by the implementation, irrespective of this case.
Right. And whether or not the event ends up locked to the frame or is discarded is I guess there are two different ways to achieve that, but yep.
Right.
Okay. What is the scenario in the event will be discarded?
Well, Andrew was suggesting that in the scenarios where we notice that something is dirty between between the isInput pending call and the actual event dispatch, then throwing away the event rather than targeting it at some other origin would avoid a security issue, where the other one would notice that it got an event despite isInput pending being.
Yeah. But is that even a thing that browser do like that? Like,
yeah, it can happen.
Browser today, if user clicks somewhere and an event gets dispatched later in the main thread, and like frame had to move between the time the browser throw away events in that scenario?
No, we don't do that, I don't think. But there's no way to have it be script observable that any kind of asynchrony or something is happening. That's the difference. The developer can't detect whether or not any of these things ever happened in the first place.
Sure, but I mean, more importantly though, like I think if the user clicked somewhere,
yeah,
and like frame moved, wouldn't that mean like click will be complete?
Okay, so actually we do actually have, as of Chrome 80 or 81, I forget which one. Do you remember, Yoav? We have an intervention we shipped where if an iframe has moved in the last 100 milliseconds, we don't dispatch events to it in order to avoid accidental or fraudulent scenarios.
Yeah, but this is tackling a different scenario, but it would also help.
But Ryosuke was just asking if there's any cases where we currently throw away the events, and that's one example.
Yeah.
Hey, can you clarify that? You said sub 100 milliseconds?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I'm pretty sure 100 milliseconds is the number we chose.
And then that event is discarded, you said?
Yeah. If an event would target against an iframe that's been moved in the last 100 milliseconds, we discard it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, are we good to move on? I can talk a little bit more about the whole intent thing, but it doesn't sound like that's an issue in itself. Considering, like, again, it won't result in any event dispatch. But yeah, one of the consequences of this is that I think we mentioned it before, but ism appending is effectively required to be used in a scenario where we have a deterministic source of yielding as well. Whether or not that's a source of a periodic timer, like other DOM APIs, which is necessary in the case where, of course, we'll want to like encourage the developer to yield to things other than just input. So this is like a simple timeout-based solution. It was mostly interested in gathering people's thoughts on whether or not like It's not the most idiomatic thing, but effectively considering it blocks rendering, it's a fairly obvious mitigation to the situation where you would have to like yield to non-input events, of course, since there won't be any deterministic sources of input in many cases.
I would just think that 100 would be a bit much, but yeah.
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 Right,
10
yeah,
FPS ought to be enough for everyone.
Squid won't continuously run for more than 100 milliseconds.
It could be a slideshow. Okay, cool. Well, if no one has any concerns, I guess that's it for now.
I guess the one question I have is that like how have we? I think some of you have been talking to the library authors about this problem space, right? Do we have like interest about or like a feedback about this API, like that they like it or they will use it or something like that?
Yeah, well, obviously the React guys are very on board with this. This was what they've been asking for a while. Chris, do you have any context on other frameworks who have been interested in using this?
Other frameworks, no, but we have multiple Google properties that really want this feature for the exact same reasons Facebook is excited about it. The ads team has had a very positive experience in the Origin trial in terms of reducing event queuing delay, the same thing that Facebook observed in their Origin trial. And there were some prototypes from G Suite demonstrating that they could improve page load time by yielding less when there's no input. So to me, that sounds very positive. They saw pretty large numbers, similar to the 100 milliseconds Andrew mentioned at TPAC.
I see. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, is there any feedback from G Suite people about like multi-users on docs with this? Did they test that scenario?
Multi-user with his input pending?
Yeah, like 10 users in a Google Doc, basically.
But each of them would have their own browser window on their own computer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have is network pending, I think is what Benjamin is working towards, right? So we can't like would be like there would be delays if other people on other machines edited your document.
I mean, you would incorporate this in your scheduler, right? Like you could have like your own queue of interrupts that you could read from.
I guess is network pending would satisfy this other use case, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
They didn't ask that, but that's a good point.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting to ask them that.
Cool.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So shall we move on to the next proposal? So we have cross-origin iframe opt-in. So Nick, I can take over scribing and you can present.
Yeah, that'd be great. So this is something that I presented at a little bit at TPAC last year. I don't have any new slides or anything to talk about it, but it's something that we're still interested in pursuing. So from a monitoring perspective, resource timing data today is helpful, but it often does not give the complete picture of everything that's being fetched on a page. A big part of that is due to cross-origin iframes. Obviously, you can crawl the main page and all the same origin iframes on a page to get a list of all the different resources from everybody that you have access to, but once you get to the cross-origin barrier, you can't get the performance entries out of the cross-origin frames. So based on, just as a summary, a bunch of research that I did a year or two ago, I found that over 30% of all resources fetched are invisible to the main page's resource timing data, accounting for over 50% of all bytes generally being fetched out there. So when somebody like us, as an analytics provider, is trying to use resource timing data to make, to monitor our customer sites for page weight and all of the different URLs that are being fetched, et cetera, we're not getting a complete picture of things. So one, in trying to think through a solution here, one proposal is to have a way for cross origins to possibly opt in to sharing their data. And the care here would be for things like ad providers that want to show that they are performing well, to open the curtain a little bit and share all the data that is being fetched from their cross-origin iframe that they're loading their content from. I would imagine social widgets are probably in the same boat as well. A big thing that we found was a lot of this content is ads, but there's a lot of things that are being hidden by cross-origin iframes. So one of the takeaways from TPAC that I got from the group was to try to find, besides us, other concrete examples of places that may want to use this. I have spoken with a couple customers of ours. In general, customers of mPulse want greater visibility and more complete and more accurate visibility into everything. I guess I could probably find a customer statement if that would help. But other people that have chimed in on the thread was actually from the Google Display and Video Ads team, where it sounds like they kind of want the same thing. A lot of their monitoring of the content on the network is hidden behind these iframes, or in several iframes deep, if you will, too, even. So, and I've spoken with a couple other companies that are doing a lot of this, that are trying to get better insights into ads, and they've resorted to doing synthetic monitoring, basically lab-based, load an ad in Singularity into a headless browser, measure it from that point of view so they can get a holistic view. But obviously synthetic is not the real world, and you'll get a wide variety of different content and different ads and different performance and different delivery and everything out in the real world. So as much as possible, I would love to get this data in RUM data if we could too. So I think the latest concrete proposal that we have is some sort of opt-in mechanism. Initially, I propose we could either reuse the timing allow origin header, which today lets you get access to the performance breakdown, or we could add another similar header like timing allow resources or timing allow origin resources or something that would be that explicit opt-in mechanism. And I think based on feedback from a couple of people in the thread, the latter, a new sort of header to opt in here, would probably be the right way to do it to avoid any consequences of reusing the existing header. And then once a site has opted in, there's some developer ergonomics around actually accessing this data. And I think I listed a couple proposals in the GitHub issue, but I think at the end of the day, the one that I like the best is a extension to Performance Observer, where you would have a flag called bubbles or something similar, where all subframes, child, grandchildren, great-grandchildren frames would bubble up to the top-level Performance Observer if you had registered it that way. And if the cross-origin iframe, child frame, had opted in, then you would also get the bubbling from those cross-origins. So that way there's no other, you're not really accessing the frame of these cross-origin frames at all, you're just getting access to some of the data that the origin has specifically opted into if it has chosen to. There is also there was a question of just like, what of this data would be bubbled up, whether is it the full URL of all these resources, is it just the domain of a resource? From our point of view, we like the more accuracy the better. I think some of the big use cases for us are things around page weight, so we certainly want access to the number of bytes and URLs. If it has to be limited to by domain, that would still work, but at the end of the day, the full URL will give our customers the ability to dig into issues more. So that's kind of where the proposal is. I guess I'm not sure from the group what next steps, or if there is any more convincing that needs to be done, or I'm more than happy to try to put a little more effort into getting actual non-us and Google people to actually say they would want this as well. But I feel like it would be good from just a holistic viewability of the web perspective for RUM to be able to access the data. And again, I don't expect all ad providers to actually opt in here, but hopefully, with kind of shining the flashlight on it, the better ones will want to, and maybe they could be incentivized in some ways to do so. Yeah.
So from my perspective, I think that the first step is to figure out whether this increases the security surface of that resource timing opens up in terms of transfer sizes and figuring out transfer sizes for credentialed resources, because as I said, we have a few issues opened up on that we will potentially discuss afterwards if we have time, and if not, in 2 weeks. So I think we need to examine that to see if it doesn't increases our risk there. I think that if we assume a double-keyed cache world, or a double-keyed everything world, this doesn't necessarily increase the risk. Maybe we also need to assume a no third-party cookie world, which means that it will be a bit further out. But generally, I think this is the main risk as I see it. I don't know if other folks have opinions.
Just quick, I assume that if we were to restrict this to prevent credentialed requests, that would still cover Nick's use case, right?
I think it will cover the use case, but I don't think that most of these third-party iframes right now are being request credentialless. So they will have to change the way that they operate in order to, to actually opt in, if we were to limit this to only credentialless resources, I think. But I agree that enabling this to only credentialless would make the security story significantly simpler.
So is that with the cross-origin equals anonymous tag on that iframe? Is that how you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think it cascades, so you'll have to also make sure that all other resources, like everything that gets reported up, is also only credentialless, which would mean that they would have to change a lot unless we have some meta, I don't know if as part of Corp and CoAP we plan to have some sort of fetch everything credentialless kind of mode. I don't know if or same origin but CORS mode. I don't know if that's planned to be a thing. So I think it would be good to start by looking at this as if it were credentialed requests, and then see if we see that it will significantly increase the risk, then we can fall back to figure out some credentialless solution. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah.
And any other concerns?
I don't really have a concern, but I mean, this is a very real and pressing problem, and I guess can we take a step back a little and say the way this proposal is framed right now, it seems framed for large hosting and CDN providers to exert influence on ad providers, but I would rather see something like timing allow cross origin that actual site providers could come in and put in and mandate that the ads on their platform be transparent. Was that ever considered?
You're saying like the top level page?
Yeah. And like give the site owners a little bit more control instead of the hosting providers. Just as a conceptual framework. Was that ever considered?
I think that this will significantly increase the security risk because the site owner can be, evil.com. And it can force Facebook.com to be transparent about its resource sizes in that scenario. Or, we could have some feature policy that will force, basically say, my third parties don't load unless they are being transparent. That is potentially possible.
Yeah, so like that's the kind of power you don't want a site operator to have.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding you. What kind of power are you aiming for?
I mean, like just as a site provider now that doesn't really have much control over the ads being shown on their page, like it would be nice for them to occasionally be able to audit that. Not saying like all the time, but like at specific times, I could see a use case where site owners say, I just want to know what's going on my site. Like, so from this minute to this minute, I'm gonna just do some benchmarking and see what the total page weight is in an accurate and automatable way on my site. I don't think that's possible right now. Clearly, we've seen that TPAC, that where we really can't get that info.
Yeah, I mean, from synthetic monitoring you can, but synthetic monitoring isn't going to give you the breadth of what all your users are experiencing out there in the real world, right?
So the problem is real. It's just that like I guess I'm like disturbed at the limited nature of this proposal in terms of like the reach. Like the reach seems just to be in the kudzu of already established vendors. Like it doesn't really allow people outside of that to participate.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll, I'm obviously coming from the perspective of us monitoring many of our customer sites, but I'm really pitching it. Yeah, but I'm also just pitching it from the use case of Joe's blog really wants visibility into everything that he has there, and he may not be able to necessarily influence his ad providers to opt into this information, but if there is enough large sites that can convince all of their ad providers to opt into this information, the other sites benefit as well, right? So all the players kind of benefit if this information can get exposed. And I'm picking on ad providers here. I think that's just because it's an easy target. There are a lot of other things, social widgets, et cetera, that can often hide some of the weight of pages behind them as well. But no, I mean, I guess I personally don't feel like it's just a pitch for the benefit of larger companies. I feel like it is a pitch for the visibility of everybody on the web that cares about this information, to be able to access it in some sort of convincing manner. We actually also, I mean, we've had a couple customers also of ours. They even just have content on 2 different domains, and for some reason they have an iframe is loading the other content, like just a financial website with 2 very different domains. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we've come up with custom solutions for them to pass this data along through iframe messaging, et cetera. But it just felt like it would have been easier if they could have said, hey, can this other domain that I trust opt into getting my data in the standard way? So there's a lot of like smaller scenarios here too. It's just, I guess I focused on the biggest one because I feel like that's one way that the web could be better in general if ads were a little more performant.
Or transparent.
Yeah.
Or audited by the site owners. Like all those things are missing now.
Right. You know, anecdotally, I've spoken with, I don't know if there's any Microsoft guys here on the call today, the MSN guys who are really focused on ad performance as well. And they built this entirely large synthetic testing lab where they actually measure every single ad that ever comes onto their MSN page. And they have, and they basically kick off the ads that are too big. And that's wonderful, right? Like you're actually putting power to some of the things that they're tracking and getting rid of some of the worst cases. But again, that's only in the lab. That's only in synthetic testing. And I was like, well, what, you know, why can't we do this in Realm? Why can't we shine a light? It feels like a big black hole from a monitoring perspective and transparency wise. So anyway, yeah.
I don't actually have objections to this. I think it's like a very small first step. I'm just disappointed in the limited scope. That's all.
That we can't have an easier way to flip a flag, right?
Yeah. Why the web can't have nice things again? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you could, I don't know, join forces on this proposal and see how you can, you know, like if and how we can increase it in scope, assuming that the initial scope flies in terms of security and privacy, we can, you know, examine more ideas and see how we can do more.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of real page weight analytics and from a historical sense is like a huge issue in terms of how we understand the web and how historically how we understand it. It's like a real problem, I think. Anyway, so Bob, I will stand down. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Thanks, man.
So just a brief going back to is input pending following a question from Chris. Do we have a sense in the group, like can I get a sense of the group in terms of adopting this work, in terms of interest from other vendors and something along those lines? If we were to send a call for consensus on adopting this work to the working group, does this work for folks, or do you have any outstanding objections?
I mean, I think idea itself seems okay. I mean, obviously, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't know if.
Of course, yes, we will send a call for consensus with the full process, but I just want to get a sense from your perspective, if there's any issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think last discussed that it seems like this is a useful thing, and a lot of library authors are saying useful that it will be useful, so that's good, right? And I think with the latest discussion of hit testing priorly and dispatching events, seems like there's not much privacy or security concern. I think obviously as we review more, maybe we find a new thing, but so far seems okay.
Okay, thanks.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you.
And Ben, from your end?
Yeah, we're not going to object.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, and with that, I think we can move on to the next item on the list, layout and stability. Annie, do you want to present or?
I don't have anything to present. It's just a real quick update. We wanted to add some debugging information to the layout stability API, and we thought about different ways to do it. And we think that the best first step would be to add a list of the n largest shifted nodes. We don't want an unbounded list since there's a lot of nodes that could be shifted, and we would ignore nodes that are like immediately inside each other. And we just like feedback on that. I'll make sure the issue goes in the notes, or if anybody has feedback here, that'll be helpful.
I'll chime in first. We're just starting to add layout and stability to Boomerang. We're looking at cumulative layout shift, et cetera, for our customers. Anytime we add a metric, the first question is, what does that metric mean and how can I affect it? Obviously, there's a lot of communication that has to go on around explaining the metrics like this, but the more debugging information that we can get in whatever way we can get it is always helpful. Having, from a first glance, from the data that we've looked at, having a list of nodes, top few nodes, whatever it is, some just main contributors, if you will, we would probably try to collect that data and include it along as like the supporting information for us for why the metric was computed in the way that it was computed. So it sounds at first blush like a really good idea. We'd have to figure out exactly what information we would capture and transmit back to us so that we could understand it. But if a list of nodes seems very straightforward and reasonable.
Thanks.
We like this idea too. I mean, I think this would really improve the web if we could make all this stuff a little bit more visible. So thumbs up.
Thanks.
Cool. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Okay, so thanks for the feedback. And I think with that, we're out of proposals, and then we have a few issues. All of them are related to security, so maybe I can start off by just talking about the general area. So like on the one hand, we have, so there's a proposal from Mike West on taking the definition of secure contexts to the next level and defining what he dubbed securer contexts, which also includes some variant of corp and co-app and co-op in terms of isolation and in terms of so transport isolation, and I forget the third part of it. But generally, I think the part that we're mostly interested in is isolation. So in a world where in-process information is potentially visible to other parts or other components that are running in your process, having performance.time, I believe, is the major concern there, as well as the memory APIs that we've discussed. And Mike is suggesting to block those concepts behind, basically make them only available in, in isolated environments. So in pages that guarantee that no cross-origin content enters the process unless it explicitly opts in to make sure that it's not, it doesn't contain any private information. So those pages presumably will have access to shared array buffers, and then the discussion is about providing them access to performance.now. I believe that the initial assumption is that performance.now is indeed high precision, which today it is not necessarily. And basically, from my perspective, I take this as an opportunity to provide contexts in which it is possible to have high precision, like higher granularity timers, where for the rest of the web we can keep performance.now in the state it is today, which I believe is around millisecond for everything that is not Chrome, and in Chrome, in non-isolated environments, it's clamped to 100, like tenths of a millisecond, 100 nanoseconds. So I still plan to talk more to Mike about this specific proposal and understand if there's anything there in terms of the threat models that I'm missing. But from your, from this group's perspective, does the idea of defining more secure contexts in which we can have, for example, more granular timers, or provide basically block the memory API behind, as something that's available to those kind of contexts, does this make sense, or are there any objections? Did I explain the issue correctly, or is the issue clear? And
Sorry, I don't know what you're precisely asking.
Okay, so what I'm asking is, if we assume that we define a new type of secure context that is isolated in terms of corp and co-op and co-ep, and we really need to figure out a better name for all those, does it make sense from your perspective in that kind of context to, for example, expose the memory APIs that we talked about, I believe, at the face-to-face, and potentially also expose higher precision timers in those scenarios, assuming that the main threat from high precision timers is indeed the various processor timing attacks.
Well, I think that when it comes to timing attacks, there are two vectors, right? Obviously, cross origin is one thing, and site isolation helps with that. There's another aspect, which is the security of the program itself. So I think from that perspective, it's not safe.
So
Right.
I'm not sure I got you there. Can you elaborate?
So for example, there are some known techniques that could defeat ASLR in certain situations.
Okay.
With high precision timing measurement. So I mean, obviously, that would constrain what people can do, right? Like in that, obviously, you can't make your browser insecure by allowing a very precise time measurement such that you can defeat the ASLR and so forth. So I mean, there's always constraints. But I mean, to an extent that the plan on the record right now is to re-enable share right buffer once we all this corp and all that stuff is spec'd, right? I see why we need to restrict the other ways to measure the time, as long as such a thing does not pose new threat beyond, share array buffer.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
In general, I'm a fan of having people have to use the high precision timing and the extended memory stuff. I'm really a big fan of having new things that people have to opt into for that, instead of overloading existing things like I'm a game person or whatever. Like, I'd much rather see it. So you had said like a new secure context. So yeah, I would even be okay. New secure context for time, new secure context for memory. Both of those are fine with me.
Okay, thanks. We lost one of your sentences in between, but I think we got the overall.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was like making a plea for finer grained than just like, hey, we have a secure context. Like, I would rather see it like parsed out give people a lot more control over what they're allowing, not just like, hey, it's a new secure context, do whatever. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and so thanks. That's helpful feedback. Otherwise, we have 3 new issues open on resource timing. One of them is related to next hop protocol and the fact that in some scenarios it can expose that the user is using a proxy if the proxy's used protocol is different from the server's. And the other 2 issues that are essentially one issue is that there are scenarios where sites that have timing allow origin star for credentialed resources, and I'm paraphrasing the issue here, but the distilled version is that in some scenarios where sites provide timing allow origin opt-in over credentialed resources, that can leak, the transfer size can leak whether a cookie was sent to them or not, and therefore can leak their history in a way, can leak the user history. So that seems like a real issue raised by the ping. They also have a few proposed mitigations, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I think we will need to talk about mitigations for that particular problem, because it seems like something that we would need to solve. So we are out of time, but just in a minute, I thought about maybe eliminating the cookie headers from the transfer size, or somehow applying some other rules or some fuzzing for credentialed resource fetches, but letting credentialed fetches report whatever it is that they're reporting now, because it doesn't expose anything beyond access control allow origin. Or something along those lines. I think we'll talk more about those options in a future call, but just as a heads up. Okay. And with that, we're out of time. So thanks. Thank you all very much. And I will see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers.